Are you a sketch designer that is making the jump to Figma? Let's jump into some tips that will help make you into a Figma pro. Alright, so let's talk about artboards. So the first thing to make an artboard is we can go ahead and choose here on this menu item that says frames. And a frame is essentially an artboard. In Sketch, a lot of times we would have artboards that were different sizes, or traditionally in like layout programs that were different sizes of paper. Here we have here's one for iPhone 14. And then if I go ahead and click on the frame button again, or press A on the keyboard, it shows a bunch of different devices here. So everything from watches, things that the community has submitted, tablets, etc. So let's say there's desktop, we can choose MacBook Pro. Alright, so I've set up a frame here or an artboard. And Figma uses frames to create different states of prototypes, or it can use them to create different components. They're really like a group on steroids, if you think of it that way. So traditionally with Sketch, for instance, if we wanted to make an interface for something, we would draw out a rectangle, and then maybe that needed to have like a background color. And then we would draw another rectangle, and we'll fill that in with a different fill here, and then we'll do some text here. And this would be a button on like a background, maybe like a device or something, give that like a rounded corner. Now, the way that I like to think Figma handles things is kind of like programming. So traditionally, if I were laying this out in front-end code like HTML and CSS, this blue area here would be a div, so it would be a container that holds that button. And then you would have the button, and sometimes those are made with a link element, which has things like padding and margins, and so does divs. And so if you think of it that way, then you start to think of frames as like those divs in Figma that give that space for your elements to live in. So whether it be a device that's a viewport, or it's maybe a part of a modal that sits off on the side for a prototype, those frames contain those elements. So let's go ahead and recreate what's on the left-hand side and put it on the right-hand side. And there's a few different ways that we can do this. We can click here, or we can press F on our keyboard for the frame tool. And so the frame here has no properties right now. It'll clip content, and that's about it. But there's a few things that we can do here that will help us out. Let's go ahead and do this as the div that holds everything for this element that we have. So I'm going to stretch this out to be a similar size to what we have on the left. Now, a quick way if you're importing files from Sketch into Figma, you can go ahead and copy here. So let's right click and we'll choose copy as properties. And so that will do things like copy the rounded rectangle and the blue background fill. And then that'll allow us to right click again, choose paste properties, and it'll look the same. So it has all of the same properties. It's got the fill, it's got the rounded corners that we wanted, and just like the rectangle had. But now this is a frame. So let's go ahead and make that button too. So I'll go ahead and let's just copy that text because it's standard text, and I'll paste that over here on the right hand side. I'm going to use a shortcut here called Shift A. And so what that did is it activated auto layout for this element. Be sure to check out my next video about how auto layout works. That'll be coming in the next series that I do for Figma. Alright, so I pressed Shift A. It created that auto layout. On the right-hand side where it says auto layout, we have some properties. So we have the spacing between items that's set to 10. I'm going to go ahead and set that to 16 because I like that. It has horizontal padding, so think about how divs have padding and margin. So that spacing between items would be kind of like margin, and horizontal padding here would be like padding in a div. So I'm going to set that to 16 because I like everything divisible by 8. And in this case, you can actually align. So with like front-end coding, this would be like horizontal align, or bottom align, top align, etc. I'm going to do this in the center, so it's center aligned. And now let's go ahead and set a fill. So we set that to white. And you know what? The padding looks like it needs a little bit more, so let's bump that up to 24. And then look at our reference here. We had 15, but I'll do that for 16 on the rounded rectangle or the rounded corners. All right, so we have our label for our button. Now what makes auto layout awesome is I'll go ahead and duplicate this for you to show. If I were to remove part of that label, the button will shrink and expand to whatever I've set that to. So definitely more to come in the auto layout video later. So what I would recommend is if you have like the urge to make something a rectangle, definitely make a frame because that's just a great way to organize your content. Let's look at frames in like a prototype sense too. I've rearranged this frame to be a modal and organized it into two different pages that we're going to link together in a prototype. In the old sketch way of doing this, I would go ahead and go into prototype here, and then we would choose that next page. So go ahead and navigate to this next page. And that's how we would do it. And what you would end up with is you would have like 80 different artboards. Sometimes they would not be in sync, and it just becomes a mess. Just to show different states of like the same page. So what I would recommend is to do something a little differently, because frames are just like artboards. They can be dragged outside of your page. So I can go ahead and drag both of these frames out. We'll delete this second one and go ahead and line these up. So we'll rename this and say like modal step 1. And then this one we'll call it modal step 2. So in the Figma way of doing this, before I go ahead and preview what that looks like, let's take down this text a little bit here, and we need to make a way to launch our modal. So I'm going to copy this button over here. We'll give it a fill the same color as this, just to be quick, and let's change the fill of the text to be white, and we'll say launch. All right, and so we'll go ahead and link this element to the modal. We'll say on click, open overlay, and then modal select. Take a look at this and hit play here. And we'll click launch, and there you go, there's step 1. So then how do we link the two to each other? Okay, so let's go back here. We'll click on the button here that says next, and we'll just drag it to that next modal. And instead of open overlay again, because that would stack them on top of each other, we can choose swap overlay. And we should be good to go. Click play to preview again. All right, so launch, we can click next here, and that goes to step 2. And so to make this really look nice, let's go ahead and delete previous. We'll click on the previous button here, and we'll drag it back to the overlay, and then we'll choose swap overlay. Also too, let's click on this button here for interaction details. We'll choose close when clicking outside, and you can choose add background behind overlay. This will give it a black shaded background to kind of make it stand out a little bit more. We'll click on play here. That'll reset again. All right, let's click on launch. Nice, looking better. Then click next. That goes to step 2. That previous button appears. If we click previous again, it goes back to step 1, and then we can click out of here. That's how to use frames to be able to do things like make buttons, create modals, and a lot of those things will later on lead to components inside of a design system that's inside of Figma. So let's go ahead and take a look at how components work. Components typically in Sketch would live in the symbols page, and they would be managed that way and stored in libraries. All right, so let's go ahead and create a component. We're going to go ahead and use auto layout like we were showing before. So let's go ahead and create some text here. So this text will say label, and then we'll press Shift A. That will create that auto layout that we talked about, and then we can start changing some of the design. So we'll do 24 for our padding, And then we'll do 16 here for the space around it. So that, as you can see, as I hover, will show you effectively what the padding is for this. And then we'll choose that center for auto layout too. Actually, let's go ahead and set a white background for the frame. So we'll do fill, and we'll set that to white. Let's do a border radius of 8. We'll set that text to a grayish type color. 444 should work fine. And I like a little bit less padding on the top and bottom. So let's maybe do that at 16 to kind of look nice here. We have our button here. Let's go ahead and turn that into a component. Right click on it and choose Create Component. Pretty straightforward. Now there's a few things that you want to take note. The first thing is the outline of it changed into purple. There is this diamond icon next to the word frame 5. That is to denote that this is the first instance of this component. So let's go ahead and rename that to button. Now if I were to press Command D, that will duplicate it. So if you notice on the left here, the duplicated component has a diamond that is an outline versus the quad diamond here for the master component, if you will, the first component of it. So if I open up Paged here, if you want to create something similar to what you were used to in Sketch, you could actually just make a page called Symbols, and then take that master component and pull it in there. Here's the component that we just made. Now because this component has auto layout, I'll go ahead and duplicate that again. I can change this label to like YouTube, for instance, and it will expand to fit that. That's due to this property on the right hand side for horizontal resizing called hug. But there's also the ability to, like, if I weren't to stretch this out, since it's center aligned, the text will go in the middle. And then this property switches to fixed because I have it set to a fixed width. And if I want to left align that text, I can click here, right align it, etc. Now for components too, one of the nice things is, so let's go back to our main component here, and we'll select the label, and then we'll choose content. So you can also specify things. I think of them like variables in JavaScript, but you can set like a value for that property of a component. So for this one, the name, I would call it label. And the value technically right now is set to label, but that could be any default text that you want it to be. So we'll click Create Property. Now what that translates to in our design is if I click here into this one that says YouTube, if you'll notice here, there on the right hand side where it says button, it has a property values. So we had that label property that we set, and this one was overridden to YouTube. We could also change that to Mastodon, and that would edit the label on our button. It's a great way to start to customize your components whenever you're building out a design system. The other thing you can do is to create different instances of components. So this is great whenever you're doing prototyping and you want to have things like a hover state. So let's go ahead and take a look at what that would look like. So go back to our components here, and we have our button, and we want to create another variant of this. We'll go on the right hand side, we'll go to properties and then choose variant, and then we can go ahead and duplicate that inside. So we have default right now, and then maybe we have variant 2, which is the hover state. So let's go ahead and resize this frame so both states will fit inside. And then we can go ahead and let's go ahead and set an outline or a stroke for this button. We'll put it to black, and we'll say it's like 6 pixels on the outside. And then this hover is also 6 pixels stroke on the outside. But for this one, we'll change it and we'll set the background color to black. And then we'll change that label text fill to white. And we'll double click on property 1 and set that to state. And then we'll say default. And then on the second one, it's state again, but we'll say this one is the hover state. Okay, in order to make the button interactive, we'll go ahead and click on prototype, and that will activate this handle. Let's drag it to the second label. And instead of on click, let's change this to while hovering, and then change to the state hover. I'll go ahead and click that. Just tidy this up a bit. And for this launch button, let's go ahead and use the button that we just made. So in order to do that, we're going to use our new button to launch these modals. In the Assets tab here, where you can see local components, we'll go ahead and drag that in. And we'll change this label on the design side to say launch. And let's go ahead and click on prototype again. We'll click and pull it over to this overlay. And then we'll say open the overlay. And I think we're good to go there. We can go ahead and delete the old one. All right, let's take a look at that in prototype mode. So go ahead and click on present. And if we hover over launch, it changes to that hover state. Very nice. And if we click on that again, that will pull up our overlay. Very nice. Now we have a modal. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe for design videos diving into more tips on Figma, auto layout components, UX methods, and everything else tech. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.